Well, hello everybody, and welcome to MBTV's special sort of outside broadcast from HIE, the Hypergrid International Expo. Those of you who know our channel and the InWorld Review know we've been on a bit of a conference break, so we thought we'd bring this to you as a little bit of a special in between things, and we will probably do so again tomorrow. I'm joined here by quite a few notables, as you would expect at a top-class conference like this. First of all, opposite me, we have here for the moment at least Thirza Ember, who's been co-organising with me, basically. Well, she's the organiser, really. She knows how to do these things with Safari and stuff. So welcome, Thirza.
Hi there, everybody.
Sitting next to me, we have another luminary who you all know and love on this channel, and that's none other than Pathfinder, John Lester. Welcome, John.
Hey, great to be here.
And another familiar person sitting next to Thirza. You know her from OSCC, but she's often on our channel as well. It's none other than Leah Lobo. Hi, Leah.
Hi, Mel. Hello, everyone.
And last but absolutely not least, we are also joined by Heike, who is in a wonderful position of understanding most of the languages of this contest. So welcome, Heike.
Heike. Welcome to everybody, and welcome everybody. And I really am thrilled, absolutely thrilled about this conference because it's an absolute dream of mine, a multilingual conference. So I'm going to repeat that in German now, if that's okay.
Yes.
Ich freue mich ganz arg, ganz riesig, dass ihr alle hier seid und dass wir das auch in mehreren Sprachen erleben können. Sono contenta che noi possiamo parlare in alcune lingue sul mondo, no? Che facciamo in Europa e anche su tutto il mondo, che l'italiano è anche la lingua che si parla. Je parle un peu de français, mais pas trop, et je suis très contente que nous sommes ensemble, tout le monde, on parle aussi toutes les langues, et on est ensemble ici en InWorld. That was it. Thank you very much. Now I did. Because I'm just thrilled. I'm the language person as per se, and this is my world, and this is a wonderful thing that you've organized. Thank you, Thirza. Thank you, Mal, for all your hard work. That is unique, what you've done here.
Oh, well, thank you for the compliment.
Thank you very much, Heike.
Yeah. Now, as you probably gathered from what Heike said there, this International Expo is unique. We've just finished a morning that has been exclusively in German language. Well, we're moving into an afternoon in about 45 minutes, which will be exclusively Spanish. And tomorrow in the morning, we have a French language half day followed by an Italian language half day. And there is a bit of overlap between the countries and the presenters, but the main thing is that the language of the half day changes so that we can accommodate people who not everybody speaks English, and certainly not fluently, so it's a major deal here. Now what we've had so far, of course, is Germany. So I was wondering, Heike, if you'd like to sort of, as you understood what was going on, shall we say, so give us a rundown of what you've seen happening so far, and then I'll get Pathfinder and others of us will comment on it.
Well, for me, the absolute highlight of the morning was the presentation by Dieter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, I've been around that length of time, and they're all eating. Okay, so now Dieter has been around for that length of time with such a capacity in programming, coding, and working on a web-based browser that he hopes to have in future to be the viewer for OpenSim. Yeah, and this is his dream, his vision, and I was blown away by this because we heard last week at the OSCC conference that this is the dream of so many of us, that we're looking forward to a web-based browser that allows our students, our learners, our friends easily join this wonderful world and not go through adding grid information and stuff. So that's been a fantastic presentation for me. Dieter Hein, who's created Cyber Lounge, yeah. And he was so spontaneous to even invite me in the break just now, just after his presentation, to his world. And here I am sitting in a web-based 3D world. Selby Evans was there as well. Dieter came around, being able to chat to them, even voice to them. Now that is unique. I mean, that is really something. And then, of course, the other presentation, to hear of the beginnings of Craft World. I mean, how heartwarming was that? Yeah, Tosha's really put it in wonderful, gentle, warm, practical, down-to-earth experience of how she came to explore Craft World, how she made it one of her own. Yeah, and it was also heartwarming to hear how through the many crashes, every so often there were crashes, and then it's still. And now they arrived at such a beautiful world. There's a shop, there's mesh import, and she showed some of the slides of the fantastic constructions, how far a Craft World has come, and that it really is truly her home now. And that was very, very nice indeed. And then I'm ever so sorry the third presentation I missed due to real life calling, but both of them, the first ones, they have taken my heart and been really a fantastic thing to do, especially in German. Yeah, to be honest, I've never heard that in German.
Yes, well, it was really funny. It was really funny when we're getting ready, because Dieter has given a lot of presentations, but he can't remember how many years it is since he gave one in German. So all his slides and everything else are already set in English, and he had to go and sort of remake them in his own language. But I'm sure I can't understand a word of it, but I'm sure he explained it very well in his native language, and it's in fact both he and Art Blue, who was the third presenter there, were both at the OSCC last week, and I gather that most of Art's presentation was very similar to the one he gave in English over at OSCC. That's that. But well, since we're talking in English, we can extend this conversation a bit, because I know Pathfinder, Leah, and to some sense there's what was at last week's conference too, OSCC. Let's talk about Dieter's thing first. Obviously, a wonderful explanation of what he's doing. And, I'm going to move to Pathfinder. What do we think of the prospect of OpenSim, or just generally speaking, worlds on the web? I mean, it is a way to extend the audience, hopefully, if being able to get people in via the web. Most of what we've seen so far tends to be the porting of installations to the web, rather than an actual live OpenSim viewer where I could be talking on the web to you in an in-world client. But hopefully we're moving in that direction. Thoughts, Pathfinder?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's always been one of the Holy Grails. one of many.
Say that. Yes.
There's many Holy Grails for the future development of and expansion of OpenSim, and then it's really been about accessibility and having a full-featured client that's in a web browser. And I mean, the big challenges are a lot of it has to do with the fact that content is not optimized in OpenSim like it is in game development engines, where you basically pre-compile your environment and then just stick it on a server somewhere, like with Unity-based environments, and all those others where everything's baked in. The strength of a platform like OpenSim is that you have dynamic content being created in situ, meaning in the server while it's live. There's stuff being built. I can res a cube in front of you, and that can be, and I can make something completely customized, not just pull out pre-optimized assets and things like that. And I mean, if it gets traction, I think that's a fantastic thing. I think there's so much hype about VR. Everyone's going to be wearing headsets and all that other stuff. And to be honest, the killer app and the killer platform has always been and continues to be the web. That is the thing that most people have open on every device is a web browser. Typically, on mobile devices, sure, you have a lot of customized apps and things like that, and more conversations happening on mobile devices. But the killer platform is the web. So I think so. It's got huge prospects.
Personally, I think anything bigger than the pair of glasses this avatar's wearing at the moment is too cumbersome for my head, that's for sure.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, in many ways, it's about bridging worlds, of course, and the light, easy way in and the more complex way in. And of course, Leah, you had a panel last week, literally called "Bridging Worlds," didn't you? And sort of. Looking at, it's funny. Any world I ever go into, the first friend I meet is you. We have experienced this, haven't we? A few months ago when at the book fair thing, that was in Science Space. But it became almost your cooling, was a water cooler room kind of thing, and that admittedly was it was on the web, because Sciencebase is a bit like OpenSim in the sense that it's not, because it's built in Unity, but it has both a dedicated client to like an OpenSim client and a web client. And what was great was that your thing there used the web client, not the dedicated client, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. That's right. And of course, Heike was running the conference, the virtual roundtable that you're describing. And so what would happen is we'd have these little 10-minute breaks, right, in between sessions. And we would click a button, load the WebGL very quickly, and boom, we were inside the world. And of course, our first act was, man, I got to have good clothes.
Of course.
So we're looking for matrix coats and top hats and you name it, right? Can't look like a noob. And then... And then there was a book fair. So there were books all around our bodies, various signage that led to books, etc. And we could run into people. But I was never more shocked than to show up in this strange place and have a Mal Burns whisper into me going, yo, where are you? And I think that's the connectedness we're talking about here. So in Cyber Lounge, in the world that Dieter has worked on, and of course I've been in his world a few times, and of course I've been in Selby's instance of it where he holds office hours, I think almost every day, right?
Yeah.
At like 10 a.m. But I've spent more time in Singer Girl's version, which is called web-worlds.com, and she's inviting people to come in and test it. And hers is a bit different. Instead of having an avatar that looks like a humanoid, right now you have a variety of shapes and sizes and colors and things, but you're not exactly humanoid. But you have all this rich collage of content, and she's focusing more on content and on interaction, and she's studying a variety of different subjects. And right now she's inviting the world to come test 24/7. So that's really pretty awesome.
Right. Yeah, I must admit I haven't experienced enough of Singer Girl's installation. I thought I went a few times for the IMA kind of site.
That's
I know
right.
she was responsible, but I must admit, I'm on the hypergrid most of the time, which is what all this is about. But I'm ever keen to look at these, kind of avenues of jumping. Now, I'm seeing in my local chat here that Joyce Bettencourt from Abercon is around here too. So if you are, do take a seat here, Joyce, and I'll bring you into the call. In fact, I think you might already be in it. So if you want to take a seat first.
If I could just mention a few words
Heike.
that Dieter said about what actually motivated him to start this hard work of coding for many years with a lot of effort, is because his dream was to get people in this world easily. And of course met enough schools and universities, and and other educators who said it's just way too complicated, and that made him go. Now, the interesting thing is that if you look around, who was it to mention it, that this big new hype coming up with virtual reality, again, people are actually making it more difficult to join a 3D immersive environment because of the head-mounted displays that are A, expensive, B, clunky, tethered, you name it. And it's kind of surprising that we are now close to going web-based, with Unity being, one of the most frequented game engines out there. And then suddenly comes this next hype, and it's only, I'm not saying only, but is it just to sell head-mounted display headsets?
Well, I'm
business.
Yes,
I think it is.
That's what it is. The hardware is it's the hardware people who are the evangelists. That's the thing. I keep thinking of now. I've got in my head in my head, from The Princess Bride. Remember when he says, life is pain. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. And that's the fact is, what are the people who are the evangelists? What are they selling? And it's always the hardware. I mean, you've got some people who say, or software developers or content developers. A lot of them saying there's a lot of potential for VR-based tech, and that's true, especially when you hear artists talking about it. There's a lot of potential there, but the loudest voices, the ones that are the most strident, are the hardware manufacturers themselves. Who are just making the hardware, and I get flashbacks to 3D TV, if you recall, and I get flashbacks to. Do you remember a little thing called the Kinect?
Yes.
that Microsoft was basically saying the future of video games, and they were saying it's so fantastic. And again, the people who were the most loud promoting that tech were the hardware developers, not the software developers.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
With all these feeds I get for VR and stuff like that, I mean, I really only pick the highlights now because I don't want to know about every new headset. I mean, the thing is there any content on it? The headset itself is nothing to me, and I don't want the headset. I admit, if I got a nice little pair of glasses, I'll probably go for it. But it's not just the expense of these headsets they're marketing. I mean, people get an Oculus or something like that, and then suddenly find they've got to buy a whole new sort of multi-$1,000 computer just to run the headset. It's not that quick and easy immersion that we.
And I want to be clear too, because I don't want to be labeled Pathfinder is a VR contrarian. There are very, very powerful use cases, but they are very narrow and deep. And the thing is, it's this broad adoption that everyone's pitching is just hardware.
I came across just I visited the Online Educa in Berlin, which is one of the top level e-learning conferences of all times, with people like Stephen Downes there, and you name all these big J. Cross and everybody, interestingly, there was very little about virtual reality, augmented reality at this conference, which kind of surprised me. But then the business educa and the higher ed and what they're all concerned about is more of this transforming changes in the universities from local brick and mortar into blended and now online, and that's sort of the big change in this educational world. Now, what was interesting though is that I met a company from Chile, and they offered a head-mounted display, but on a very cheapish sort of solution. They said $100 a smartphone will do, Samsung Gear will do $60 US. And they developed a world which they claimed actually caused children to read more. And that was the whole intention. And they developed what looked like a mixture of a virtual game of a text adventure or an adventure type game whereby you would enter into a 3D castle, sort of like a video game, and then text presented itself to you if you didn't understand and read the text properly, you couldn't answer the question, and then you couldn't proceed in the game. So it was a typical adventure game, but they made studies that the kids actually read a lot more and a lot longer using head-mounted displays versus the same game on a tablet. Now, how is that?
Mm. Do you know? I mean, I just how can I put this? In the early days of Second Life and things, we were all going on about, immersion, and that is good. But in a strictly tactile way, I'm not very comfortable with full immersion. Even when I'm walking around with headphones on and it blocks out the noise around me, I'm sometimes a bit on edge because I'm worried that I might be missing something very important. And the idea that I'm fully immersed in, haptic gear and headsets and gloves and motion cameras and stuff all around me, to the extent that I would almost lose contact with the real world, it doesn't. I feel uncomfortable when I haven't got that tangible sort of pipeline back to reality. Now, I suspect when we're talking about a whole new generation of young kids, right? Maybe they will be growing up in a world where all this, a sort of situation where immersion is actually a total disconnect for as long as it lasts. Maybe, they will respond to that because they haven't yet learned that dependency on the organic cues our bodies have in the real world. I would hate to think they lose it, but, maybe they will just be able to adopt that more. I don't know what you think.
It'd be interesting to find out from Pathfinder where he sees this development going.
Yeah, it's the hard word is oh.
Sorry, I just interrupted and said worrying. Actually, I think Pathfinder may have temporarily lost his voice.
Oh, there we go.
There we are. Right.
Oh. I'm sorry. What was I missed part of that because my headphones were glitched out.
I said.
Well, Pathfinder is the master educator in immersive worlds in my eyes.
Sure.
So I mean, I'd love to see or hear your vision about how children would possibly learn in future.
Well, it's the VR tech is it's all about immersion. So it's about perceptual immersion. So it's about experiential learning, right? It's about, so think of those use cases, those learning use cases that would benefit most from real experiential learning. So, for example, I don't know, teaching someone how to be an archaeologist, which is all about digging and exploring a three-dimensional environment and being very perceptive and learning the visual cues for, hey, there's a fossil there, and how to even manipulate the earth and to preserve fossils and dig them up and all that. So you can imagine that's perfectly matched tech to the learning use case where you really need a very powerful immersive learning thing. And the challenge is, though, that most education isn't that, because most education is still for, stuck in the last millennium or last 2 millennium back, right? Where it's like we're just going to let them read stuff and watch, take them, take these quizzes and consume
Make
this.
Effective factory workers.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because it's amazing. It's amazing, with education. If you took someone from 300 years ago and brought them into a modern classroom, they'd still be like, yeah, I get this. I understand how this is working. Not just the physical classroom, but how the classroom behaves, the type of material they're learning. They'd be like, okay, those books look really weird because they've got these keys on them, and they've got this thing that you're calling a screen, but it's still basically a book, and they're kind of consuming stuff. And there's someone at the front of the desk, front of the room, who's obviously the teacher, and there's this thing that looks like a blackboard. Yeah, it's still a blackboard, and so it's so slow to adopt new stuff. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there's so much power for VR to create these really powerful, immersive, perceptual learning environments. But the thing is, most education isn't focused on those types of,
and not financed or even ready for it almost.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's that there's 2 dilemmas for me. One is that education is a lifelong process. You should never really stop learning, which is probably more important in this day and age of, accelerated communication technologies than ever before. But the fact that, these phase scenarios of education you're talking about, in a sense, those textbooks should be irrelevant because they're out of date almost the moment they're written. It's almost as though teachers really need to be guides for students rather than, teachers per se that just recite the rule book and stuff like that, because the rule book was thrown out, 2 minutes before they started reading it.
Actually, I asked this exclusive audience at the Online Educa a question or a little survey via Twitter. I asked the question, will the future of learning lead to A, biodiversity, or B, endangered species? And I'm talking about future of work and future of learning being the same sense and content. Yeah. Will we see more biodiversity, or will we see a conformist type of education that actually leads to some of the professions really dying out in future?
Yeah, that's a very good. Sorry, Joyce.
I was going to say the future of work. I mean, the stats are like, what, in 20 years, like almost 50% of professions will not be something that is around.
Extinct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about biodiversity in its typical sense, I think the bio will probably be more species-wise. But although I guess we have our environmental impact, going back to the stuff that we were talking about, like almost merging these two things, right? Like definitely the ecosystem of VR, I think, is still stuck in that technology headset mentality, right? And we're also talking about the experiences and how really that is the soul and the whole reason behind, I think, why you would even want to be more immersed in general, is if it can lend something more to it, right? And I think that is something, as people even working in not always 360 heads up display worlds as we are in virtual worlds, like we get that, right? And I think that's those use cases and how to Pathfinder's point, how to best kind of like the experiences and the engagement factor, that kind of to me transcends can transcend into 360 space, but I have yet to see a lot of the 360 kind of VR, especially those focused on tech, like kind of carry that, like kind of get that, right? They think of the defaults like, well, we'll use it for gaming, or we use it for social, and people are going to sit and share and watch videos. And it's like, okay, yeah, we get that. But even I remember being at the Oculus Developer Conference a couple of years ago and talking to John Carmack, and there was a couple of us there talking about various use cases, and one was a doctor who was using 360 VR stuff to train like health workers in remote countries. And very, like you said, it's an absolutely perfect example of how you can actually use it in a great way.
It's
Carmack's response was like, "Oh, that's interesting," and definitely these things that are good use cases in the interim until like the kind of the ecosystem kind of catches up and it's more ubiquitous. As if it's like, well, great, that's something good to do right now, but really long term, I don't care about that.
But the other thing I noticed when I came through this stuff, is that although it is hardware focused, there is clearly a take up for this headset sort of stuff, but it's not where I think a lot of people thought it would be. Sure, a few hardcore gamers who've got more money than sense to get all the equipment, maybe. But interestingly, it is out of the home. VR arcades are being built. Industry is using it for some remarkable things where they can go to, virtual creations at microscopic levels. Surgeons can see more in a VR recreation of a patient they're operating on than they can with the normal, keyhole cameras. Obviously, the sensors and everything is expensive. It has to be really hardwired, but they can do things in detail. They couldn't even do a keyhole surgery. So, there are huge technical jumps here, but that has nothing to do with our passion, which is virtual spaces, especially the hypergrid. If I ask Thirza for her thoughts on this, I mean,
I'm going to say yes. Not really anything to do with this conference, no.
Yeah,
That's absolutely right.
it's almost as if, well, anything that isn't helpful for the hypergrid is really out of the picture.
Well,
If
I
they
think
want me.
it depends what you want to use the OpenSim for. If you're here to do education or to make money in other ways, then yes, you need all these novelty things like wearing the cardboard box thing and everything. But I think most of the people who are present at this conference are not really that interested in so much in making it a job or as education. They're all grid owners and content makers, people making art. We had Dieter earlier, who was very doing something very wonderful for not just for it as a technical thing, but it would be a wonderful step forward for the community. I think most of the people who are present here today, that's really their number one interest, which is really why we wanted to have this conference, because one of the things that you notice very much when you go to OSCC, it's very academic, it's very professional. It's to do with OpenSim as a tool used for the outer world, whereas most of the people who are appearing in this conference, they're really much more interested in the community that is OpenSim itself, rather than trying to use it to do something else. And these people often don't have a voice. They're not given, they tend to not look to have a voice. They're not very boastful people. It's often quite hard to get them to tell their story, because they're not, trying to, I'm bragging about, oh, I did this and I did that. So you really have to kind of drag it out of them quite often, what their talents are, what their skills are. They prefer to be anonymous. And so, of course, the language is the other thing that stops a lot of people speaking, because their English just isn't up to it. And so it's great to be able to hear people who normally are quite shy actually having a chance to share their vision of OpenSim with the world, because I think it's a vision of OpenSim that often the professionals don't see. They don't have no clue what's going on, and none of us do quite often, because there's just so much going on.
So much of it,
right? So many worlds, so many projects. You go to a grid. We're going to a grid on Wednesday for the safari, and which I had never heard of before. I just happened to end up there, and there's they have 20 little regions that are set up like little worlds, and each one has got its story going on. 20 different people just making the most beautiful content, and so it's all going on sort of behind the scenes. So much of OpenSim is unmappable, unknowable, and that's a little bit that people kind of don't want you to know, and a little bit of the anti-social platform side of things, that they don't want to get involved with that. So you really have to hunt for the stuff, and that's the good thing about this event. I think we brought together a lot of people who usually hide.
And this is exactly what I meant with biodiversity. It is a beautiful mix. I mean, this is what Second Life and Virtual Worlds is for me. User-generated content, in my eyes, is the most beautiful natural habitat for creativity, just like the tree behind us, symbolizing the hypergridding, symbolizing the nature of virtual worlds that have developed in OpenSim and through OpenSim. And so, in my eyes, virtual worlds definitely fit the label biodiverse. Absolutely.
Okay. Let me move on, because hopefully we'll all be back here this time tomorrow as well, to extend the conversation with what happens in the meantime. But we've probably got about 10 or at most 15 minutes.
Lester just dropped dead.
Okay. That's probably his avatar's got to sleep, but never mind. Now when Heike, when you did your wonderful summary, of course, we've got diverted a bit here as a result of talking about Dieter's efforts, which are absolutely wonderful. But then, of course, we had Tosha. And you were telling us how wonderful, again, I didn't make head or tail of it, but how wonderful Tosha's talk was. And I think both Thirza and I would like to give a shout out here to Liku Raw from Craft Grid, who literally stepped in halfway through our building organizing process and offered us space on this grid as opposed to a grid we were it was a slightly different code base and we weren't getting on with it very well. So Liku stepped up and offered us the space here. So I think Thirza, we'd love to thank him on air for that, wouldn't we?
Oh, definitely. He was brilliant.
Absolutely.
He just we're very grateful also to Frandor Pertwee, who gave us the original HIE grid, which was a great training ground for us. And we were able to do the logistics of how the build would look. And that really worked out well. It just wasn't quite strong enough to take a big crowd, so that's when Liku stepped in and allowed us to have these regions, and it's worked out very, very well.
Yeah, and by all the signs, this is much.
How many people were present? Awesome.
Yeah,
I was really impressed.
We had a few glitches at the start on our tech side, but they seem to have sorted themselves out, and it seems to be running smoothly and better than we dreamed. So this is also good. Moving back to Tosha, though, her talk, wasn't it, Heike, was really about the history of Craft Grid.
Exactly.
And Craft Grid, as well as helping us with this conference, really it's one of the older, sort of bigger grids, shall I say, that came on OpenSim, and it's always had this. Well, its very name, Craft Grid, it sort of puts itself almost in the arts category, and it's had a very dominant role, hasn't it, in the evolution of OpenSim, one of the early ones and stuff. I mean. What did sort of Tosha tell? Did Tosha tell us anything new, or was it just a really glorious, reprise of history?
What she mentioned was a couple of sort of personal impression, a personal history of hers, as she grew through Craft Grid into the adoption of this virtual world, and it was. Do you remember the slides with the children that she mentioned? Because there's a couple of they got kids into Craft World, and their experiences were shown in this beautiful painting that they did. How they appreciated to be in a virtual world, and that's it so far.
Well, Pathfinder, you are a long timer in this, as is Thirza, in fact, but I'm thinking of Hypergrid Adventures Club days almost. Would you agree that Craft Grid itself, has been fairly pivotal and, in that history of things, hasn't it? An early player.
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, that was one of the first really diverse and stable and particularly like a lot of artistic content on it, grids that I ever recall first doing the hypergrid jumping. There was the craft world, and then Franco Grid, and those are. It's wonderful to see the early folks still around. It's because there were so many. If I had a nickel for every grid that popped up and then went poof, or this is really cool, and then you come back and it's gone. And I remember the early days of the hypergrid, I always kind of assumed everything would just disappear. That's why I think I was always blogging back in the early days. I was always like, gotta capture every excursion because it'll be gone tomorrow.
Get it while it's going, guys.
And so I'm just like doing a Google search through my old posts, on the Hypergrid Adventurers Club, and there are a bunch of Craft Grid excursion and Craft World excursions, and they were one of the folks that I initially added to my old Hypergrid landmarks page, which was a manually curated back in the day, list of here are places to go, and it's just wonderful to see things that take root and just continue, especially when they also support so much really interesting and amazing artistic talent, because I think that's what really, it's the combination of really engaging content and really interesting and nice people that make people come back.
I think this comes back to what Thirza was saying too. I mean, and you hinted on the same people. I very rarely go to, most of us probably started with an account in Second Life or a prototype platform, but, I rarely go back there anymore because I always feel when I get there, that vast though it is behind its wonderful walled garden, the pioneering spirit's gone. It's another function now. It's like people escapism, people with their residences. It's like the word resident is really the thing. Whereas in OpenSim, we are still crossing the hypergrid and discovering people who are still what I would call the pioneers. They, this is the place they want to be, out in the open, and sometimes in their little nooks and crannies, but just creating, getting on with stuff, and communicating with their friends, and sometimes the greater world.
Yeah.
Mal, now that you mention that, this is Lear.
Yeah.
I remember the Hypergrid Safari, and I think it was an OSCC conference as well, when Thirza took us by Craft World and took us to Lumiere Noir's build. I remember thinking back to my early days in Second Life in 2005, right?
Yeah.
When I went to the Ivory Tower Primitives and saw his work. Yeah. And I think that's one of the connections we all have as we go from world to world is the fact that we have not just this great content, but this feeling of permanence, this feeling of connectedness. He's gone now. And of course that was devastating, his loss, but his work is still out there, and it's actually part of each of us.
That's
the
true.
things we make.
And the build we went to see was actually not built by him exactly. It was built by Tosha Tyran, who is his partner, and she for many years laboured in the shadow, if you will, of Lumiere.
Yes.
And but I think it's, again, you're absolutely right. It's to do with feelings, and it's to do with people, and it's to do with community, because she's been able to carry that on, and she's been given the space for free where she can do that kind of thing. Which
so that's awesome.
Again, you don't get that necessarily in a commercial setting, of course. Many people do receive free area, but not for years and years and years, the way you find people are able to do it in OpenSim. And it often does take a long time for people to realize what they're missing. If something's gone after a month, we're all so busy. We're like, oh yes, I'll go and do that. And then when you go there, it's already finished. Oh, that's a shame. Yeah. So that's the wonderful thing about OpenSim, is that many times you think you're going to do something, and you don't get round to it for ages. And when you do get round to it, there it is, still there waiting for you.
And actually, what a lovely...
And doesn't Tosha also do a lot of collaborative work with getting school children from different countries together?
She does a bit of that, yeah. And also Tao Kwan. Well, Craft is just a very academic friendly grid. They do loads of things. Liku is really smart about how he manages to meld the idea of the students with the idea of just being a regular grid where anybody can come. And he's managed to do that in a way I don't think anybody else has achieved. Managing to keep the sense of openness, but at the same time keeping the students free. He's very unique. He's done a great job.
Awesome.
Sorry, now I'm just typing in our little back channel here. A call shortly to Garima. Right. Well, I think, like all shows, it all goes too quickly here, but we will be back tomorrow to continue the thing. I think the last word there really went to Thirza. She summed it up very nicely. In approximately 10 minutes' time, this event will convert itself from German language into Spanish language for the afternoon. And what I do know we've got coming up, presentations with slides and stuff, but although it's actually part of the Spanish language thing, we will be having something very, very interesting coming up from Cherry Mango, who, of course, we think of more as a Franco-grid person, French. I'm not going to blow it, but people in the audience here and the gamblers will see it when it happens. That's all we're going to say, isn't it? We all know what Cherry gets up to when she's given free rein. So I guess very quickly, give yourself 30 seconds each. I'll go around you. Anything you're particularly looking forward to coming up in the next half day or days? Let's start with Joyce. 30 seconds. please.
Of course, I have to find the unmute.
That's
but
it.
hello.
That's impossible, isn't it?
Well, probably for a lot of us here. But yeah, no, I'm certainly looking forward to the rest of the presentations here and sort of making those connections both in some of where we jumped off from OSCC, and like obviously there's some presenters that are here too for this conference that have made that jump, and sort of seeing that broader community stuff as Thirza was putting, was mentioning the rest of the Hypergrid International Expo will be fantastic, and of course there'll be the archives of all of this for both conferences afterwards too to pour through. So.
Yes, I will get a quick mention in there because we didn't really discuss what our Blue was talking about. But of course, there is an English version. The archives will be up, and there is an English version of pretty much the same thing from last week to the OCC archives. Okay, Leah, anything exciting you're looking forward to on the agenda that you've seen?
Well, I'm looking forward to Karima's from Kitely making poetry come to life, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, Cherry Manga's. Wow, what an avatar, right? From Festavi. I've been taking quite a few photos, and I've been tweeting them. I don't know if you guys have been following. So you can look for the hashtag HIE for looking for photos from the session in case you're tuning in only through the airwaves.
Yes, exactly. The good old web where the world needs to be, as we said. Pathfinder, what's exciting for you in the next 24 hours, I suppose?
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot of it is hearing presentations by people that I know and have, or maybe they don't know me, but I've been fans of theirs for a long time, and like Cherry Manga, I've known her for a long time, and seeing what new stuff they're up to, because it's it's that combination of strong social ties, with people you've known over time, and then seeing, hey, here's this new crazy thing that I'm working on. So it's that something old, something new experience that is just magic to me.
Okay, well, before I ask, there's a Heike. Anything special on the agenda that's getting you excited before tomorrow?
Well, I think the specialty was this morning already listening to Dieter's presentation. Yeah. That was really special for me and also quite unexpected. I also look forward to hearing from Salazar, if that's the Salazar that I think it is.
Yeah.
Okay, the Italian scripter now in use. Amy Socrates is one, and of course shouldn't miss, and I'm sorry to sound vain, but I'm looking forward to a blues guitarist.
Yes,
Morbid.
Yeah, that of course will be. He is German, of course, but he's a wonderful blues artist. I'm a big fan of blues myself. It's my default sort of style of music, although I have very eclectic taste. And that should be wonderful, and that will be at the end of today. We might. I don't know whether we'll be filming it. It would depend on him, but who knows? Who knows? That's a wonderful thing about ad-libbing. Okay, so Thirza, what are we really going to see next? In brief.
I think we're going to see a melding. That's what I think. We're going to see how you can meld from Spanish to French to German without anybody losing their life.
Wow.
Right.
That comes after.
That comes after. Yeah, we draw a moat around France and sink it. Sorry. I don't know. Yeah, it couldn't be more interesting, this language shifting, because I'm sure it's going to alter kind of the whole flavour, because when you move to a different culture and a different language, it's even obviously the moderator, even as their style is going to come through and stuff.
And how many interpreters are actually working tirelessly in the background?
Quite a few.
Want to know how that works?
We cheat.
So what we did was,
I want to know how it works.
For many years, I worked as a simultaneous translator, and so I knew that nobody here would be aware enough of how you have to speak when you're being translated simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I got every one of the speakers to give me the bare bones of their talk, and some gave more than the bare bones. But what I did, I got it all in English. And then we translated it, Tosha and myself. Tosha speaks a bunch of languages. And so between the two of us, we were able to translate into the 5 languages. And then I gave the notes to the various people. This is the first time they've done it. So they're all kind of frustrated and trying to get to grips with it because this is a new experience for them. This is not what they do for a living. So they've just been fantastic. I would like to name them, if I may. I'd like to name Lux, first of all, who's just been wonderful. Davici Straulino, she did the French for us. We had, I should say, Lux Tergeste, that's our Italian translator. We had Rana Oximoxi, she did the Spanish for us. And we also had Bink Draconia did the English for us. She's a German speaker, so she did the English for us. And they just were magnificent, all of them. And we've got 3 more sessions to go.
Big round of applause.
I have to say at the back end here, you know, it was funny because it just worked out as we thought or hoped, you know, because it was quite quiet in local chat, but suddenly all the language channels were flashing, you know, and all the different people from the different languages were busy chatting in those groups, which is exactly how we wanted it to go. So amazing stuff. Okay, well, on those final words, I'm going to have to close this out because we've got about 5 minutes before we do start go back to the main stage where the Spanish events will start happening. If all goes well, however, we will be back here on these seats at lunchtime tomorrow to bring you up to date on, well, this afternoon and tomorrow morning. And possibly even a bit at the end too, but we'll see how that goes. So I hope you all enjoyed the conference, everybody. And from our sort of outside broadcast unit, shall I say, it's bye for now as we switch you back to the main events at the Hypergrid International Expo 2017.